Kevin Rudd, Australia's Foreign Minister, thanks for your time today.
Good to be with you.
Do you feel the Asia-Pacific community debate was one worth starting?
Oh, absolutely. You see, the problem in our part of the world is we lack adequate institutions. Adequate institutions in this region to deal with underlying political and security challenges. APEC's existed for 20 years on economic integration and trade liberalisation. That's terrific. But on the political and security front, frankly, there's been a great gap, which is why, several years ago, I began promoting the idea of an Asia-Pacific community.
One of the main criticisms of the Asia-Pacific community debate has focused not so much on the substance of the idea, but on the process, particularly behind the announcement and the consultation beforehand. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
No. And the reason I don't is because an initiative has to begin somewhere. You can consult your way to death on some of these things and they don't produce results. This had to be a debate which was publicly engaged, publicly argued, and bring to the surface any frictions or opposition to it at home or abroad. And it did. But the bottom line is what ultimately wins through is the strength of the argument, which is that if we're going to maintain the strategic stability of East Asia into the decades ahead, given that this region is replete with a whole bunch of unresolved security dilemmas, we needed an institution which was capable of building confidence and security building measures and to evolve the habits of cooperation and evolve in turn a sense of security community. So to get there, you had to have a debate. If it was confined entirely to private diplomacy, well, I'm not so sure we would have made the progress that we've made.
Were you surprised somewhat by the premature rejection from some leaders around the region, and particularly within ASEAN, and why did you not see them as central to the process from the beginning?
I think it was inevitable that certain states would have reacted because they were primarily concerned about the centrality of ASEAN as they saw it. I've been a long-standing fan of ASEAN, and so that for me was not at issue. But I think what we faced was a much broader challenge than that for ASEAN itself, which was the future of the wider region. As I've often said before, we could look to ASEAN, in fact, as a positive example of what regionalism could do. Remember, the countries of Southeast Asia were ripping each other to pieces back in the 60s and 70s. If you look at it, however, as it stands today, ASEAN in 2011 is a community of 10 Southeast Asian states of multiple ideologies and different political systems, but where you've had an effective sense of security community for a long time now. Now, that represents a model for the wider region, and that's where I have been seized of ASEAN's example. Obviously, people would react to elements of the proposal, but as I said, you can't bring about change on the simplistic assumption that there's going to be an automatic diplomatic chorus of support from day one. It doesn't work that way.
On that opposition, can you take us a bit more behind the scenes as to which particular pockets were supportive or rejected the idea almost outright? Where did you see those most strongly?
Well, I'm now Australia's chief diplomat, so my answer to your question is no. And the reason is it doesn't actually help. You are an intelligent analyst of events. You will know where there was resistance and where there was support. Draw your attention, though, to one critical event, which was at the APEC meeting in Singapore in 2009, end of 2009, where my good friend from Singapore, Tommy Koh, decided with no notification to myself that after I'd given a presentation on the Asia-Pacific community to 1,000 assembled bizoids from right across the region, the bulk of whom would have come from Singapore, that he should put it to an automatic vote from the floor as to whether people thought whether they thought APEC was adequate or whether we needed an Asia-Pacific community. And being in Singapore and with Tommy in the chair, and Tommy having expressed some scepticism about this from from days at the beginning of the debate, it was quite a difficult environment. Notwithstanding that, we had, I think, 56% of people respond positively from the floor. And that's because people get it. The very simple proposition that if your number one objective is prosperity for all peoples in this region and lifting people out of poverty, then the strategic underpinnings of that are stability in the security policy environment. Then the question becomes one of how do you maintain that? And are our existing institutions adequate to that task? And the logic flows. And that's as the Europeans discovered it after 300 years of trial, error and mainly failure. And while our concept of community is vastly different to theirs, it's something from which we also stood to learn.
I was actually in the room for Tommy's vote, and I remember the Thai Prime Minister at the time was actually supportive of the principle, at least, of new architecture. Another element of the debate that's had a lot of focus has been Dick Woolcott's appointment and his work. What was your relationship, your professional relationship with Dick during that period? How often would you meet, if you can sort of give us a flavour for that?
Oh, quite frequently, but my staff and senior policy advisor at the time, Gary Quinlan, who's now our permanent rep in New York, would have met with Dick on a regular basis, frequent basis, and I would catch up with Dick from time to time. The reason I chose Dick, very simply, was that he knew the ropes. Vastly experienced, known well across the region, had done a similar task for the then Labor government in the propagation of the idea of APEC. And this, of course, was the next evolution. So he was the right man for the job, and I was pleased he was able to help.
Finally, with the expansion of the East Asian Summit and the inclusion of Russia and the United States, where does this debate go from here? Is it over?
Well, let's go and look at what were the fundamental objectives which were laid out in the original speech I gave on the Asia-Pacific community in Sydney in 2008. Number one, that we need an institution in our wider region of sufficiently wide membership to be able to deal with the great challenges of our region's future. And the problem was we had, of course, America not at the table. Number two is that we need an institution with a sufficiently broad mandate to cover not just economic cooperation, not just cover trade facilitation, not just to cover investment facilitation, but capable of dealing with the nuttier and thornier questions of a political and security nature, for such an institution to have a mandate which could do all of the above. What we've achieved with, finally, on the back of a fair bit of diplomacy from us, with American membership of the East Asian Summit, is those two core underlying objectives. But as for the future, the challenge now is to make this institution work and to realise the broader goals for an Asia-Pacific community as well, which go to the future of confidence and security building measures, building the habits and forms and culture of cooperation. The building blocks are now there. They weren't there before, and you could never do the work unless the building blocks had been laid.
Minister, thanks for your time today.
It's a pleasure.